Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the number one podcast discussing the construction industry and business and real estate investing in the country, hosted by a guy with a cream-colored hat with the AdWork logo, Black Bill, and today, this Carhartt jacket. Podcast with those credentials, number one in the U.S. I'm a little more bundled up today because the heater in my office is out. And it's freezing, but I'm here. I'm surprised you can't see my breath. Want to thank everybody that's been listening to the podcast. We really appreciate it. If you have been listening and gotten any enjoyment, any tidbits of information, anything that's useful to you, please help us out by rating us. Go on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Give us a review and a rating. The rating 5-star is amazing, but if you could follow it up with a few words of kindness, that helps us even more. Again, it can be as simple as good guy on podcast, enjoy. Or he very intelligent when come to construction things. Anything along those lines, that would make me feel great and it would help us jump the ranks, and really appreciate it. Sorry, I'm sipping my coffee this morning. Again, it's freezing. Today, it is Monday, so jumping into a little Motivation Monday. And rather Motivation Monday, I wanted to take Monday today to tell a little story. Maybe we can call it motivation. Maybe we can just call it, whatever you call it, what you want to call it. What struck me today that I wanted to discuss is just let's call it connecting the dots. And what I mean by connecting the dots is oftentimes if you just persevere with what you're doing, you may not know how you're going to get there, but everything comes together and somehow the dots connect if you are able to follow the path and keep pushing forward and looking for the connection to connect those dots to really become the thing you want it to become and to propel you to do the thing you want to do. In my case, kind of an interesting story. I'll tell a story of what I call the story of the two Johns. One, John Gardner, and another I call Tracksuit Johnny. And also one of the first homes that I built and where I was in my career at the time, and how that led inevitably to what I really wanted to do, which is investing in real estate. So let's go back. Some of this I might have touched on when I gave my brief bio in a previous podcast, but doesn't matter if you haven't listened to it. If you have listened to it, I might touch on some things I've already talked about, but that's neither here nor there. So early in my career, I was called to a project to get the smell of cats out of a home. Now, this was interesting. I had never done something like this, and I didn't know what to expect. But when I went to meet the client, this is the first John I'll be discussing. I met him at this 2-story home in a suburb of the San Jose in the Bay Area in California. And it was just a regular 2-story home, nice house on probably a 9,000-foot lot in the middle of a neighborhood. You drive into the driveway, and it had this bridged breezeway that was part of the second story that kind of flew over the main portion of the house, flew over the driveway, connected to a 3-car garage. So if you can imagine, the garage is on the left side. You have above the garage a little living space, a bridge that bridges the house over to the main portion of the house where it's a 2-story entrance, kitchen, etc., bedrooms. Pull into this house. There's John. Never met him. John's, pretty tall dude, older guy, graying hair. Me and John eventually formed a really close friendship that you'll come to find out. And we talked for a minute outside the house, and he said, "Look, the tenant of this house, the grandmother passed away. They were renting from me, and we didn't really check up on her much. But come to find out, she was a real hoarder, and specifically, she loved rescuing cats. And now we need to get this house in shape because we're going to sell it. And in doing so, we definitely need to get the smell of cats out of the house, and we want to get your opinion on what we can do. So I said, hey, I'm game. Let's go inside and look. So we approached the door, and little did I know what I was going to walk into. But when me and John opened the front door to walk in the house, you were instantly hit with the craziest smell of just cat urine, cat everything, cat. And I'm admittedly not a cat person. I apologize to anybody who is. But it was so overwhelming that I had to take a step back and gather myself before we could go back in the house. And in going back in the house, he then proceeded to tell me that not only was she rescuing cats, but she had in the order of almost 100 cats in this probably 3,000 square foot 2-story home. And the county actually had to come and take the cats to a shelter. They didn't know what's going on, but when John gave them word of it, they said this is one of the most intense cases of anybody hoarding cats that they've ever seen. So now I'm left with the challenge of getting this smell. I mean, these cats were running wild through the house. I'm sure peeing all over everything. How do you keep a house sanitary with almost 100 cats crawling all over the place? It was something else. So long story short, the conclusion I came to is the only way we're gonna get this smell out is rip up all of the carpets, rip up all of the hardwood floor, tear off all of the sheetrock in the house, and then we're going to have to paint primer on all of the subfloor, paint primer on all of the stud bays, and then re-insulate, re-sheetrock, do brand new floors, and then repaint. And I thought that was our only fighting chance of getting the smell of these cats out of the house. John, so this was in the order of, a 6-figure job that I was proposing, and hesitantly, John agreed. And in agreeing, we struck up a conversation, and he proceeded to tell me that one of the reasons he wanted to offload this property that had previously been a rental is because he does private money lending primarily to contractors and developers for real estate transactions, and he wanted to free up the capital because there was probably a little over $1 million in equity sitting in this home, so he had more money to loan out. Now, at the time early in my career, I had these vague aspirations of being a real estate investor, had no clue what that meant, and honestly, even when John told me what he did, the dots were absolutely not connected, but it was stored in the bank in the back of my head that that was an interesting thing. It didn't at all strike a match to where I thought, oh wow, I could really utilize this guy's services. I didn't even know what that would have looked like. I was just in the pure grind, the pure hustle, but kept it in the back of my mind. Me and John struck up a friendship. He became kind of almost a mentor. What I found out later is he had started a commercial and residential HVAC company. He was one of the first guys in the Bay Area with a large scale company. One of the first guys, his interesting story, he tells me, he was one of the first guys with a cell phone. The reason he got a cell phone back in the day when it was like a brick and he was paying $1,500 a month for his cell phone plan was because he wanted to be one of the first people that could respond to a client when they called instead of them having to wait, because back then oftentimes there was an office phone, so they'd have to wait for someone to get back to the office, check the office phone, and then probably call them back the next day. But his cell phone that he was paying $1,500 to $2,000 a month for the plan was his competitive advantage, and he got to the point where he was making 7 figures annually and eventually sold his company to a bigger conglomerate, and that's how he cashed out and got into the real estate loan and private money game. That's an aside. So finished the project, actually got the cat smell out of the house. It was like a 4 or 5 month grind, and again formed a strong friendship with John, and me and him continued to talk, for the kind of the years to come, and stay in touch, and we'd have lunch every now and then. But that was dot number one that I hadn't connected, but an interesting story, and a close friendship was formed. So I progressed in my career, and I had mentioned I was kind of waffling on what I was going to do. I was doing some tile, I was doing this and that. I mentioned the concrete company thing at one point, but I had really focused on what I'm going to do is be a builder. And eventually I know that I want to invest in real estate. So went down that path, canned the tile company, anything else that was on my mind, got the laser beam focus, started moving forward. In doing this, I got my first build. I was also still doing remodels often, and additions, because that's just what was out there for me. I hadn't climbed the ladder and ascended to the point where I was strictly a new home builder. And I come to meet another John. This guy came to me as a referral from a past client, and he calls me and he says, "Hey, I have a project that I'm actually flipping, and I want to know if you can come take a look at it. I'm looking for a builder to partner with." By partner with, he meant just do the work, but he wanted a builder to, quote, partner with that would be his go-to guy to do multiple projects as he progressed. So I say, sure. Go to meet him, and I meet him in the San Jose foothills near the country club at the time, at this 3-story monstrosity. And when I pull up to the driveway, he's not there yet. And this is like a kind of a cool property, super dated and ugly, but you pull up, and when you're in the driveway, you're kind of suspended because the driveway is up at a different grade than the house. So it's almost like you're on this bridge kind of driveway. Sorry, bridge again. I guess that's a common denominator between these two houses. But you're kind of suspended and overlooking the valley, because the country club, the elevation kind of goes up in San Jose in that area. It's in the foothills, of the east foothills. So you're kind of looking over the town. So it had a great view. That's a huge plus. As I'm waiting for him, I see someone pull up in a white Jaguar, which, who drives a Jaguar? That's kind of crazy. But gets out of the car, and instantly I'm struck with, like, who is this guy? He's in an Adidas tracksuit. He has like gold metal framed glasses. So he kind of, and like this preppy, like parted hair, parted from the left side to the right. So he looks kind of like this dorky computer engineer. However, he's in an Adidas tracksuit and some sneakers, and it just like, just totally doesn't make sense to me what's going on with this guy. And he comes up to me. I get out of my truck. Hey, how's it going? Hey, how's it going? Yada, yada, yada. So yeah, this is what I'm doing. I'm flipping this house, and I'm hoping to make a little profit on this, that, and I need to know what your opinion is on what we can do, and I have my own ideas. And we start talking. So in talking, I've come to call him Tracksuit Johnny. He tells me he's in finance at Cisco Systems. And if you know, you're in the Bay Area, you're in tech, that's a really good job. Like Cisco Systems, for a time, was booming. And if you were at all associated with Cisco Systems, you're in really good shape. And he was one of their directors in their finance department. But as of late, he took some seminar or took some course, decided he was going to focus on flipping real estate. Why the hell? But you know, hey. And this was one of his first properties. He had done a couple before, but this was the largest one he'd done. And, you know, he wanted to go in, and he was going to basically revamp all the bathrooms, revamp the kitchen, put a new big door in the back so you can capitalize on this view, and yada, 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 yada. He wanted to get my opinion on what we could do. At the time, I had like 12 employees working for me, and it wasn't super directed like what my employees were doing. It was, I had 12 people working on just, you know, some building, some remodel. I had some guys that were carpenters, some guys that could do finish, some guys that could do a little bit of electrical, plumbing, etc. Like it just slowly I had accumulated employees to handle all of the miscellaneous day-to-day things we needed to do. which was working for a time, but it also got pretty tough managing that many employees that were all doing like these miscellaneous trades, not super directed. Like I have 12 employees that are just framing houses, and we're framing houses every day. Like that becomes pretty easy because you can put a foreman in place and you do that. But that was my organization at the time, and I said, hey, I have the manpower. I'm coming off of another project, and I was really busy at the time, but I did have a little window. Yeah, I can help you out. But I said, I'd love to pick your brain. Can we do coffee? Can we go to Santana Row and, get a lunch, do something? And he was totally amenable to that. And it actually, a lot of times when you ask people for their advice, or if you want to pick their brain, like they actually like that because people want to talk about what they're doing and people want to help out. So he was totally up for it. And again, I'm still in a place, years had progressed since I had met the first John, but still in a place where inevitably I had aspirations to get into this realm. Start doing the project, get into it. We have a good relationship, and I dedicate most of my crew to this project because it actually became a lot larger project than I expected. And he was on a tight time frame because he was a total grinder about, he had some project management background in addition to finance, and he was totally grinding on schedule and, when things can get done, how they're going to get done. And so dedicated my whole crew to that. Ended up having multiple lunches, coffees with him, got to know what he was doing. He eventually actually, interestingly enough, after this project, it was probably like 3 projects later, he ended up quitting his job in finance at Cisco to go full-time in house flipping, joined a mastermind group, became a mentor in this mastermind real estate investment group. I've never done any of the mastermind groups or anything like that where you kind of, this one particularly, you pay $25,000 to get in this group, and then you're in this mastermind group. They could be very beneficial because you get access to people that are in the game, and you can kind of feed off each other. So he got into that. He became a mentor, and he's still doing it to this day. His model's a little different, but we can go into that in another episode. So, however, I made that connection, kind of got the 411 and got the knowledge of like how it is he got into flipping, what it is he does, and he basically explained to me that, yeah, he has a network of lenders, and typically what he does is he'll identify a property, and when he identifies the property, he does a quick pro forma, which a pro forma is just like a spreadsheet breaking down, this is the price that the property's at, or this is what I want to pay for the property, this is what I think I'm going to put into the property in construction, and this is how long it'll take me, and this is what I think I can sell it for. And in doing that pro forma, you can come up with your bottom line of what you think you can make at the end of the project. That's a pro forma. They can get very detailed, but he said basically find these projects typically off market somehow if he has a connection with a realtor or something, puts together a pro forma, and he has a network of private money lenders that he will go to, and they'll lend him a certain amount based on the value, the final finished value of the property. So if he finds a property, make simple math, the property is $1 million, he wants to put $500,000 into it, he thinks he can sell it for $200 or $2 million. A lot of these lenders will say, okay, I'll lend you up to 85% of the after construction value. So they'll give you 85% of the future projected value. Initially when you're acquiring the property, they want you to put a little money up front. They don't just say, here's a check for 85%. What they'll do is they'll say, okay, we're going to give you 90% of what it costs to buy it, which would be $900K of $1 million. So you'd have to come up with $100K, and then they'll give you the rest as a construction loan that they'll kind of give you in draws. They don't want to give you all the money because then if you hightail it or you don't finish the project or your car drives off a cliff, they're not out the money they've given you. So it's there's a governor on it in that way. But he explained to me the process, explained to me he's working with these private lenders. And when he said that, it kind of struck me, wow, private lenders. Okay, back in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, I remember John was doing private lending. John's like one of these guys. Come to find out, unless you're going through a broker, which makes it a lot easier, these private lenders are pretty hard to get direct relationships with because a lot of times they will go through a broker, because the broker is just like the middleman that doles out these people to contractors or investors that need money. But then the broker typically charges a percentage on top, and points are, like 1%, 2%, 3% of the loan fee. And that's how you get access to them, which at the time I didn't even know. But I just know that I had met John initially with the Cat House. John told me he was a private money lender. Great. Didn't know quite what that meant to me. Then I met Tracksuit Johnny years later. Tracksuit Johnny was doing real estate investment, all based on getting private money lent to him. Wow, okay, so that's interesting. But so fast forward, I think I've touched on this story a little bit, but I have 12 guys working for me full time. I'm running remodels, but I'm getting stuck on projects dragging out, managing these guys, not adequately keeping my funnel full because I'm so busy managing the work we have and the employees I have, that I got to I wanted to be strictly a home builder, strictly a real estate investor, but I got to the point where it was just overwhelming managing everyone and trying to grow the business, and I didn't know what to do. But we had projects we had to finish, and I wasn't prospecting new work, so I had this weird lull in new bids that I was doing because I was so focused on the current work. And I got to a point where I had payroll coming up in 2 weeks. The work we were on, I had collected most of the money, but there were a lot of checklists and a lot of punch list items we had to finish. And I had to dedicate these guys time to it because we couldn't leave the job unfinished. And I was naive and didn't realize what the end of project punch list and what the end of project really meant at that time. So these projects that I had projected would be done, at this time, were really dragging out like 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks later. And it was just grinding me down because those 12 guys on payroll like really hits you hard every week. Boom, boom, boom. When you have 12 guys on payroll, think about it. I forget what it was at the time, but it's like into the low teens, in the thousands of dollars a weekly. So I grind to this point, and I'm stressed out trying to get all these projects finished. Meanwhile, my bank account's dwindling, and I'm supporting all these guys, and I'm not drawing money at that time. And I get to a point where I have a few bids out for one specifically for a new house, couple remodels, couple this, couple that, but nothing's hitting. I'm grinding down trying to finish these punch lists on these jobs with all my employees. And I remember sitting at my desk one day and just reviewing where I'm at in my projections. And in my bank account, I had $3,200. And I didn't have any checks coming in that week. And I had 12 guys to support. And I think this was like a Tuesday or something like that. And I didn't know where the money was going to come from. And I was like, holy shit, am I on the verge of, having to go borrow some money from someone to cover my payroll? And I'm slowly creeping out of business. Like what did I do here? I was so caught up in the grind that this is the position I'm in. This is crazy because we've been a busy company. We did nothing wrong. Little phase of, oh, I'm feeling sorry. Oh, what the fuck? All this, all that. But $3,200 in the bank, 12 guys on payroll I need to support. None of these prospects that I had were hitting. And I get a call from a client in Willow Glen that I had given a proposal to for a brand new house. It was the biggest proposal I had looming at the time. And it was for a new house. I forget the total contract value, but I want to say it was definitely in the mid 1 millions, approaching 2 for this new construction. And calls me and says, hey, we want to get together and review your bid. I was bidding against 3 other people at the time. Can we get together, on X day? But it was that week. Of course. Yeah, why don't we meet at the property? Why don't we go over my proposal? And I'll also bring a copy of our contract so you can review what that looks like. Now, this would have been the biggest house I had signed to date at the time. So I kind of had a little apprehension going into it. Not apprehension that I could do the project, but just apprehension that they were going to select me because the builders I was bidding against were actually a little more experienced and had a little more clout behind them in that specific area. So I go, and it's that week, and payroll hadn't hit yet, and sit down at the house that was going to be torn down to build this new house in the dining room. We're sitting around the dining table discussing my bid, a bunch of questions. I had a scope of work lined out with different line items, and they're asking this and they're asking that. They're asking, what's your timeline to build? All the questions you ask somebody that's going to build your home. They're asking those questions. And towards the end, the husband says, we're comfortable with you. You came recommended by Lou. Lou was an architect at the time, and Lou had told him, hey, you should work with Kenny, he's a good dude. And we want to move forward. And I could hardly contain my excitement internally. I didn't get up and jump for joy, but it was very much an oh shit relief moment. But an oh shit relief moment that I knew they wanted to move forward, but the project wasn't going to start for like 5-6 weeks. And that wasn't going to help my immediate dire situation. But then he followed up with, so we can give you something now to lock you in to get started, which it wasn't even a thought in my mind. I never went in asking for money. I was always too afraid to do that. I've later changed my practices because I know my value. However, at the time, it was like not even a thought. I would have been scared to ask for that. He said, so how much do you need? And I mustered up the courage somehow, and I don't know where it came from, but I said, well, typically we'd take a $50,000 retainer to lock us in to start the project. And without hesitation, he looked at me and said, okay, and asked his wife if she'd cut a check and give it to me. And again, like the fireworks are going off inside of me. It was just the most amazing feeling. And she wrote a $50,000 check, gave it to me that day. I left that property with a plan that I was going to build that house and deposited a $50K check. Money woes solved. And from that point on, like strictly built homes and became a builder. And specifically, I became one of the largest builders in that specific area, but branched out from there. But it was a testament, in my opinion, to the power of just continuing to push forward and perseverance, because I was always moving forward. I was always grinding. But the way that's not the dot. That's not the dot that I had mentioned earlier. The dot was I grinded out that house. I finished that house. It was beautiful. Unfortunately, at the end of that project, well, not unfortunately, it was an amazing house, and they've been repeat clients that I've done multiple houses for. But unfortunately for that house, they thought it was going to be their forever home, but they had some family issues out of state, and immediately upon finishing it, they sold it off for $2.5 million or 2.8, or I forget the exact total, high twos, but they sold off that property. In selling off that property, a couple potential buyers who came through the property were the next door neighbors. They ended up not buying the property. They had thought about it, but they looked at my work and decided we're going to have our house remodeled, and they want to discuss it with me. So I go next door to meet the next door neighbors that had looked at this house I just finished. Bill, great dude. And I looked through the house. We ended up striking up a relationship. I was obviously top of their list because I had just done the house next door, and ended up gutting their whole house. Do the house. It looks amazing. Bill and Debbie, great, amazing people. And finished the house. It looks great. This was like an 8-month thing. Have a conversation with Bill at the end of the project, and he tells me they have a house in San Jose that was their previous house before they moved to this house. They need to get rid of it. They might want to do a few things to remodel that house. Could I go take a look at it? Sure. I meet Bill over there. About a week later, and in this different part of San Jose, no one's living in the house because it's their previous house that they had a tenant in, but the tenant moved out. They wanted to remodel it. They're going to sell it off. And I asked Bill, what do you want to do? He said, I don't know what I'm thinking. I just want to maximize my sale. And it struck me in that meeting. I had this like revelation, and the dots just overwhelmed me and connected to me that, hey, here's a property that I know this guy owns outright. He wants to sell it, but he has to put money into it before he sells it. Instead of that, why don't I connect these dots? I've heard that sometimes you can have owners finance a property and hold it while you do the construction. They hold the loan on it so you don't have to go through a bank. You do the construction, you sell, you pay them out, plus the interest that they've made on the holding costs, and it could be a win-win. And I had never done anything in real estate before. I knew I wanted to get into it. I had no clue how I was going to get into it. And truthfully, I didn't really have the money to put down some big deposit on a property to go to a traditional broker or hard money lender and say, I've identified this property. I'm going to give you $250,000 down so I could jump into a project. I didn't have that kind of capital, but all the dots overwhelmed me, and I got this rush of excitement. And on the spot at that first meeting with Bill, whose house I had just finished, I said, Bill, I have a great idea. And it was like the words were just coming through me. It's like everything came together and I just became superhuman. And it was crazy. Like a lightning bolt. Bill, this is the idea. Don't sell this property, or don't remodel this property. Finance the property to me. Owner financing. Let's identify a price you want. I'm not going to give you $1. You're just going to hold the note on the property. And I'll give you interest payments every month against that note. But in doing so, allow me to get a construction loan. This would be the private money aspect. I think I know a guy who I can get money loaned to do the construction. I'm gonna remodel this whole thing and maybe add a little footage. Turn around. I'm gonna sell it, and when I sell it, I'll pay you out what the price we agree on plus your interest, and this will be an investment property for me. And without hesitation, because we had formed this great relationship, I just finished their house. He was a good dude. He had the excess capital. He didn't need to sell it at that moment. He shook my hand and agreed. And that was my first real estate deal. It was $800 to $1,000 and some change that we agreed on. I was going to pay him for the property. I went to John. Hey, John, I know you do the private money. How would this deal be structured? The owner, Bill, is willing to let you have first position on the loan so I could do the construction. And it's probably going to take me this amount of time. John said, well, yeah, if I have first position, you don't have to give me any money down, and I'll give you the money at 10%, I think it was at the time, or maybe it was 8%. I forget what interest rates were at that time. Done. And within a matter of 2 weeks, I had closed on the property with Bill. I had John in the process of putting the construction loan together. That was a private money loan that was going to fund in the next week. And flash forward a month, I'm in construction with money in the bank from John that he had loaned to me to do the construction. I owned this property. I had before this, I had no idea that this would have happened, but the dots all connected. And I was using Tracksuit Johnny's model of what he did when he went into homes and how he strategically remodeled certain areas, put money here instead of here, and dollied it up, fixed up this whole house, interior, exterior. And at the end of the day, probably a 6 to 8 month grind, ended up selling that house for $1,450,000, which I couldn't have imagined I would have done. It was shocking. My buddy Dennis sold the house and made multiple six figures on that deal. And that's because in years leading up, little dots were forming, and I was maintaining these relationships, didn't know where they were headed, but I knew I had a direction. I kept pushing forward, and in pushing forward and in tightening my focus and in slowly connecting these dots, it all eventually led to this pivotal moment of a force greater than me taking over my body and me saying, Bill, why don't we do this deal? Because I think it could be fruitful for both of us. And that was my first real estate deal, and I went on to do many more and still do a lot more. And honestly, I still go meet John for lunch. I still use John. I still talk to Tracksuit Johnny often, and we discuss what he's doing. I tell him what I'm doing, and it's just a great thing. And that all comes from just like the perseverance and connecting the dots. So my little Motivation Monday tidbit is, every little small relationship matters, and listen and be aware of the people that you're surrounded by and connect those dots, and they could lead to something a lot larger than you think in the future. Anyway, appreciate it, everybody.